Have you ever walked into a place of worship and felt a chill that didn't come from the air conditioner? Have you ever looked into the eyes of a fellow worshiper and seen a hunger that wasn't for the word of God? In the heart of the bustling city of Akure, there stood a cathedral so magnificent it was called the City of Gold. To the world, it was a sanctuary of glass and marble. But if your spiritual eyes were open, you would see the truth. You would see that some members didn't walk through the gates. They descended from the ancient Iroko trees at the back, as they were not humans. You would see the faces of tithe payers who drove in every Sunday with luxury cars adorned in gold, but their skin was unnaturally damp, smelling of ancient silt and rotting swamp water. This is the story of Pastor Mike, a man who grew tired of waiting on God and decided to invite dark evil forces into the sanctuary. It is a story of a bargain that could never be settled. The wife who lived in a golden prison and the brave couple who finally saw the beast behind the pulpit. Before the private jet, Mike was a man who knew the sound of an empty stomach. For 15 years, he preached in a wooden shack in Akure. His wife, Mercy, was a faithful, loyal, and devoted Christian. She was the one who held his hands when they were empty, encouraging him to stay steadfast. Even when their daughter, Louise, went to school with a stomach full of water because there was no food. Mercy was a farmer and sold petty seasonal items to assist the family. She loved Mike with all her heart, but Mike's heart was beginning to rot with envy. He saw his classmates, fellow pastors, driving the latest cars, while he joined his wife in the farm, his hands calloused and his pockets empty. One day, Mike decided to seek out his old classmate, Pastor Peter, who was now a mega pastor. Mike waited for 2 days in long queues, humiliated and ignored. On the third day, he slept at the gate. At midnight, Pastor Peter finally saw him and invited him in. They scheduled a meeting for the next day. The next morning at 3 a.m., Mike got up to pray. Mercy joined him, but she felt a sudden sharp unease. As they finished, a heavy unnatural rain began to fall. Louise began to scream with a stomach ache. Mercy pleaded, "Mike, don't go. The rain, the child's pain, these are signs. Something is wrong." But Mike was blinded by ambition. He put on his only good suit, the one he had worn for 3 days. As he stepped out, the sole of his only shoe pulled off completely. He didn't care. He tied it with a string and walked into the rain. At the office, Pastor Peter asked a chilling question. "Mike, are you tired of failure? Are you ready to belong?" Peter told him about the covenant of the deep roots. At first, Mike's spirit rejected it. He went home, but the suffering tripled. His wife's petty business collapsed. His farm dried up. Then came the news. His mother was dying and needed money he didn't have. Frustrated and broken, Mike went back to Peter. "I am ready to do anything," he whispered. That night at 1 a.m., while Mercy thought he was at an all-night prayer meeting, Mike was in the deepest part of the forest. He took an oath. He told the priest of the roots, "I want the crowd. I want wealth. I want money." The priest replied, "The good things of life follows blood. To grow this forest, you must plant what is most precious." Mike agreed, not knowing the precious seed was his daughter's life. Within a month, a heavy silence fell over his house. Louis went to sleep and never woke up. The town called it illness, but Mike didn't cry at the funeral. He was too busy listening to the sound of bulldozers clearing land for his new cathedral. Money was flowing in from everywhere. 2 years later, his mother withered away like a dried leaf. As soon as she took her last breath, the shack became a billionaire cathedral. The crowd arrived in thousands, but they weren't all humans. The city of gold was now a landmark, but the people in the pews were a nightmare. Because Mike's power came from the forest and the water, spirits came to feed. To a human eye, they were socialites in lace, but on the marble floor, their shadows had tails. The head usher had arms that were inches too long, his fingers ending in blunt eating claws. Mike became the master of the reverse miracle. He would command a tumor to vanish, and the crowd would roar. But weeks later, the sickness would return, 3 times more aggressive. When the victims returned weeping, Mike would roar from the golden pulpit. "You sinned! Your secret heart brought this devil back. Do not blame the prophet, blame your soul." He would then claim that agents of darkness were attacking him, and the people would sow protection seeds of millions. Meanwhile, Mercy sat on the altar, her eyes dead. She saw the members licking their lips during the sermon, looking at the congregation not as brothers, but as mates. While the darkness grew, Mr. and Mrs. Godwin moved to Akure from Port Harcourt. Mr. Godwin was an engineer of logic. Sarah, his wife, was a woman of firebrand prayer. They had everything except a child. Their new house was right at the end of the street of the city of gold. "It is a sign," Sarah said, but the whispers followed. First, it was Brother Pius. Brother Pius narrated his ordeal with the pastor. He said when the pastor touched his leg, he felt cold scales, and the choir, it sounded like 1,000 crickets in a graveyard. Then it was Sister Martha. Sister Martha said she looked in the restroom mirror and saw a woman standing behind her, and one of her face was like a goat and the other was a human. And then it was a former cleaner who found the room behind the altar filled with raw meat and piles of human shoes with no owners. Sarah was desperate. She ignored the red flags, blinded by her hope for a Samuel. Mike announced a massive program. Digital billboards watched the city. The governor was in the front row. Days before the program, Mike had sacrificed his own wife, Mercy, to renew his power. Before she died, he stood on the altar and prophesied that angels of darkness were attacking his home. He told the church to pray for his wife and to pray for him. And when she finally died weeks later, the congregation hailed him as a strong man of God who continued the work despite his grief. On the final night, the Godwins arrived. Beside them sat a man who smelled like stagnant poured water and didn't blink for 2 hours. Mike looked like a god on stage, but his eyes were bloodshot. Out of the blue, he roared, "There is a couple here. 7 years of barrenness. Tonight, your Samuel is born." As the Godwins walked up, the animal members began to growl, a sound that vibrated in the floorboards. The spirit sensed the Godwin's light. Mike raised his hand to touch Sarah, but he froze. He saw a flaming sword blocking his path. He began to sweat, shrinking. "The agents of darkness are here. They followed this couple to kill the prophet." In the chaos, the spiritual veil tore from Mr. Godwin. He looked at the rafters. There were no wooden beams. There were thousands of bats with human faces, their wings unfolding, waiting for the signal to feast. The Godwins bolted for the exit. They didn't stop until they barricaded their doors and prayed until dawn. That night, the city of gold burned. A ghostly blue flame consumed the interior but left the structure standing. When the firemen arrived, they didn't find humans. They found the charred carcasses of hyenas, pythons, and vultures, tangled in expensive Italian suits and lace dresses. The government quickly claimed it was a chemical gas leak to prevent a panic, but the locals knew. Pastor Mike was found in his office, unbound but insane. He was rocking back and forth, talking to a pile of dust he called Louis and a shadow he called Mercy. He had run out of family to give, and the forest has finally taken his mind. Months later, in Port Harcourt, a baby's cry filled the Godwin's home. Sarah sat in her rocking chair, cradling her son, Samuel. She traced his warmth, soft fingers, breathing in his scent, the scent of life, far from the smell of the swamp. She had learned that a true miracle doesn't require a price of blood. Friends, be careful where you seek your miracles. Some people build cathedrals not to reach God, but to hide the beasts they have become. Because some churches are just forests with roofs.
Thank you for listening to this tale. If you enjoyed this story, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who loves folk tales. I'd love to hear from you. Tell me in the comments who your favorite character was and why. Your support helps keep these stories alive. Until the next tale, stay curious, stay inspired.